Hi, my name is Alex Espayat. I serve as one of the assistant directors at the Center for Multicultural Affairs here at Duke University. I'm here with Dr. Caroline Lattimore. She served as the first Dean of Minority Affairs here at Duke as well, and it is important to note that she was the first female Black Dean, the first female Black individual to carry the title of Dean out of the Division of Student Affairs. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Lattimore.
Thank you.
So what I want to start by asking is, how did you become the first Dean of Minority Affairs here?
In 1978, I graduated from the graduate school here at Duke with a PhD in educational psychology and specialty in intelligence testing. I had worked in the office of Black Affairs under Reverend John Borens, and he was the fourth person to work with African American students in student affairs. And in 1978, Reverend Borens received a job offer in Oakland, California as minister, and he accepted the job in Oakland. And Dean John Fine, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, called me in Washington, D.C. I was working for the D.C. chapter, or rather the Duke company called National Testing Service, NTS, under Dr. Katzenmeyer, who was one of my Duke professors. And when Dean Borens took the job, Dean Fine called and offered me the job as Dean of Black Affairs. When I came to Duke to interview for the job, it was presented to me that because the federal government had begun to use the word minority in their documents, and so Duke wanted to be in step with that. And so a group of Duke personnel had met and talked with various people in student affairs and with President Terry Sanford at the time. And they agreed that they would change the title to Minority Affairs instead of Black Affairs. And so it became the Office of Minority Affairs, and I became the first female to carry the title of Dean in Student Affairs. And at the time, I don't think there were any others that I can recall that carried the title of Dean at that time of Minority Affairs, so I was considered the first to carry that title.
Oh. So one of the things that I had been considering as we'd been doing research for the 50th was what the student climate was like. Obviously this was a really big period of activism, so as both an observer and a supporter, what was it like at Duke during that time as you were stepping into this role?
Yes, in 1978, I accepted the position formally October 1, 1978. And Duke has always had an environment where students are politically astute. They love to engage in projects that will allow them to benefit in various capacities. And certainly this was the same thing among African American students. In particular, the name change from Black Affairs to Minority Affairs was disturbing to some students because they felt that they would be put in a category with all other students who were not majority students, and they would lose the benefit of having an office and personnel dedicated to them. Duke was, of course, primarily Caucasian, and we had about 3 to 5% African Americans, and then 2% others, so forth and so forth. And so students were already engaged in many projects that they felt could benefit them more. And they particularly had a student affairs group, and this was a student group that always looked at things in the universities to see what could be improved. And they felt that the office should remain focused on black students, and they felt that they wanted a culture center and various other things. They would bring these things to what was called the President's Council on Black Affairs. And so the question of the name change was the first thing I had to address. We talked about it in the Council of Black Affairs under President Sanford. And we also talked about a culture center. And that started the 10-year struggle to get a culture center. And of course, there were other things that were discussed prior to my coming to Duke. And of course, that was the fact that we needed more black faculty and we needed African American studies. And so the deans prior to me in student affairs addressed those things.
With the development of the Mary Lou Williams Center in 1983, I imagine that the direction, maybe the mission or the expectations from the from minority affairs shifted. So what was that like?
It was a very interesting time. It was a time that we felt was a long time coming, but it made a big difference in many of the students because they felt they had a place to go to not only socialize and meet others, but also we would have lectures and we would have events in the Culture Center and invite all students. So the Culture Center was seen as a place for all people, although the emphasis was on African American students. And if you look at the floor plan, the first Culture Center space was in the basement of the Flowers building, and it was originally the place where the post office was. So it was a large space, and the post office moved to the new Bryant Center. And so the space in the basement of Flowers consisted of a study room, an office, a section for books, library. We wanted to develop a library. And it also had a multi-purpose room where the Black Mass Choir could come and practice. And it also was used for many committee meetings among African American students. So it was a time that the students really enjoyed coming together in that space. And we had a director, the first director. And so it was well received by the students. Of course, we had some concern because the faculty loved to see the students have support, but they didn't want our students just to stay in that space and not enjoy the benefits of the 200 programs supported by student affairs. But that never occurred. Our students were leaders all across the campus. And most notably, we had Reggie Howard in 1978, At the time, he had been elected as student body president of Duke. And so our students never just stayed in one space, even though they loved it. But it seemed to be a place where they enjoyed gathering, but it didn't stop their desire to be leaders across the campus.
Oh, that's amazing. So how did the work shift for the other populations, aside from the Black student population here? How did Minority Affairs decide who they were going to serve?
It was discussed by many persons, led by Terry Sanford, and of course the Dean of Student Affairs, and others who were interested in African American activities on campus. And so the decision came down from the president's office, and he had met with more than, I'd say, about 100 people, 30 of whom were, 25 or 30 of whom were on the President's Council of Black Affairs. And so the vote carried, and it was announced that this is what we would do.
So I remember you naming in our conversation earlier that you were in this position in your deanship until 1991, correct? So after that time, you know, it evolved into Office of Intercultural Affairs and then into the new millennium as Center for Multicultural Affairs. So why are entities like all the names that we've held before now, up until now, for the past 50 years, so important at institutions like Duke?
Well, the name is very important because Duke always tried to listen carefully to students when they had concerns. And the name was always important because it seemed to let students know that Duke wants them here. Duke recognizes their presence. Duke know that they are talented, they are gifted in various ways. So I think it always helped African American students in particular to know that Duke wanted them here and was willing to work with them. And President Terry Sanford was always wonderful in that role. He met with students, he listened to them, he talked with faculty and staff members, and so that let us know that there was some level of importance attributed to the space. Now, as far as the work of Minority Affairs is concerned, Student Affairs asked us, or me, to help lead the study group to figure out what we wanted in the floor plan, where we could have the space, what name could we use as the name of the Culture Center. And so over those 10 years, I met with many students. And each year, during those 10 years, we tried to move forward. We tried to find the space, and then we surveyed a couple of other universities that had culture centers. Mostly, the name that I recall vividly was Purdue, and they had a culture center back then. And we looked at that and maybe 3 or 4 other places to see what they were doing and how that pattern or an alternate pattern could fit at Duke. And so the work on the Culture Center, it took 10 years to do that. And so that's how we were involved in the work of the Culture Center. We did have the dedication in September of 1983. We invited the community. We had it out on the main quad. And we also had a guest artist, literary artist, and that was Toni Morris. And we all talked with different people who were interested in culture affairs. And so that's how we finally dedicated it, and the work. We worked year after year after year, and we finally got everything we needed.
So, in your personal opinion and with your expertise, why do centers like the Center for Multicultural Affairs matter now and for the next 50 years?
Well, I think that it is more important now than ever, because recently I retired in 2010 but worked to 2014 in academic affairs. But in terms of an office like Multicultural Affairs, which is the name they use now, instead of Minority Affairs, they use Multicultural Affairs to include other minorities and to let them know that they are welcome and appreciated. But it is so important now because the protests that we have seen across the country. And when we talk about the people who are influencing African Americans, we think of John Lewis. He said we have to get in good trouble. We have to protest. We have to make sure that we don't lose any ground in terms of the benefits that African Americans should have as citizens. And we look at groups like Black Lives Matter, and many of the things when they talk about Lives Matter, you think about the protests of the 60s and early 70s, which brought to the forefront at Duke Minority Affairs and now Multicultural Affairs. So it's more important now than ever. Black lives do matter.
As we start to reflect on the entirety of the 50 years, and we plan to celebrate this in the upcoming months, I want to ask you something a little bit more pointed about our theme, which our theme was, or it is, we were there and now we're here, redefining our center. So to you, what does it mean to redefine a center?
Well, that's an important question because, again, we want to solidify the fact that African American students, as well as our international students under Multicultural Affairs theme, as we redefine the theme, we must continue to emphasize the fact that international students, as well as African American students, are still trying to fit in places where there might be a struggle to do so. So as you redefine the mission, we must always keep the advancement of students who are in the minority, who are international students, who are African Americans. We must keep in mind that these students still need support. They still work in an environment which is primarily majority-based in terms of the atmosphere. And so as you redefine it, the task that is before you, keep in mind the original purpose, and still, according to the American population, Black Lives Matter, and so do other minorities. They must be supported. They must be accepted as full citizens, as full-fledged students with all the rights and benefits of that institution.
Absolutely. And I think we see that now. This institution has seen an ever-evolving student representation. And so a lot of who folks assume the Multicultural Affairs Office to support is, okay, the Mary Lou has the Black folk, and then Multicultural Affairs has Latinx students and Asian American Pacific Islander students. And so what we've really tried to articulate is we have a focus on all students of color and their intersections and some. And so what advice would you give to our students, these young folk, as they move forward in navigating their Duke journey, and then what comes afterwards?
Well, as they navigate their Duke experience, again, it's important for them to look at the situation in terms of the structure, the support, and redefining the purpose, to look at that and to make sure that whatever verbiage is used, that it reassures these students that you are welcomed here, you are recognized here, we appreciate your presence here. And I think that is important for students to be aware of what's going on and to have some input in defining it. Now again, in terms of the future, we know that we have students who will matriculate, graduate, and then go all over the world. We have students from just about every country you could think of in some form or fashion. And in the future, to me, these are going to be our politicians. And I'm going to look to them to make sure that they are, again, supporting the principle that all people are to be treated with equal rights. So, and this is not just politicians, but we have athletes who have become business persons, we have superior educators, we have medical personnel, and again, these are people who are going to be running the country, and many of them are going to be running the world. And so in the future, that's where I see that the Duke principle and purpose of Multicultural Center that plays in the back of their mind, well, we got to make sure we take care of everybody. We got to make sure we take care of those who need help and assistance. That's where I see it.
Absolutely. My last question. What advice do you have for folks who engage in this work and support students?
For persons who are working with African American students and, of course, international students, etc. For those staff members who engage in that work, I think it's important to be of a mindset that you want to make things better, not only for these students, but by making things better for your minority students, for your international students, for your African American students. You make the university and the environment better for all students. Because when students feel accepted and wanted, they communicate that feeling with their friends, regardless of the race, creed, or color. And so, to me, if you are working with that goal and purpose of helping the students, just keep in mind that you are helping to benefit the campus as a whole, and the reputation of Duke as being a university who is one of the top research universities in the country, but who also appreciate the diversity that these students bring. And so, yes, Duke has always had an interesting number of people who want to get into Duke for whatever reason. And I think that one of those reasons can be that we have students of every race who can contribute to the arts scene, who can contribute to the medical scene, who can contribute to the education, the political scene. And so as long as the staff remembers that, and remembers that you're making it better as an institution, and a good reputation is maintained by having acceptances among students of all races.
Is there anything else that you feel like is important for us to remember as we go into our next 50 years?
The only thing I would add is when you, as staff members or personnel and faculty, when you work with these issues, always remember to get the input of others, not just those that you serve. Always include them, but include students from student government who understand the political environment among students. Include faculty members who understand how one must keep your academics together, do well in those, even though you have protests or you have activities to move things forward. And also keep in mind that you want to include some staff members from both student affairs and faculty members from the graduate school, the medical school, Trinity College of Arts and Science, the environmental school. Keep in mind that they have excellent analysis and understanding, and they comprehend very easily the environment. So always include others and build that level of support. I'm sure you will find it to be very helpful.
I believe it, and I see that advice extending to our students as well and how they build coalition with one another. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the conversation with you, and I look forward to moving our center with the same grace and intention that I understand you have.
Well, best wishes, and I know that you will do an excellent job, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dean Lattimore. I really appreciate it.